This video is one of the parts of a video series I plan to make commemorating Charlie Kirk by defending his memory and ideology. The video series will encompass a large deal of topics, mainly basic moral principles, economics in terms of incentive structures and rights, government and their duties, and more. Additionally, after I've outlined the main principles behind what I believe to be his general ideology, I will debunk specific arguments that have attempted to taint his memory by presenting him as racist, homophobic, evil, etc. Now, due to the scope of what I am attempting to do, it is impossible for me to explore every avenue of these topics. I will generally try to discuss the basic principles and reasoning, but I would highly recommend doing your own research and reaching your own conclusions on any of the given subjects I discuss, as there will always be aspects I cannot dedicate time to in these videos. Without further ado, here is the video. This video aims to outline what freedom of speech is, why it is important, and why it must be legally protected. To preface this video, I would like to quickly define rights, though I would like to note that I plan to make a further video on this subject. Rights are universal freedoms of a human that cannot be infringed insofar as one does not violate another's rights. For instance, you have the right to express your opinion. You have the right to own property, you have the right to live, you have the right to self-ownership, and so on. But you do not hold the right to harm another or destroy their property. Rights are derived from principles of self-ownership, i.e. the right to your body, mind, labor, etc., whereas the exclusions for rights derive from the non-aggression principle, known as the NAP, which basically refers to the idea that one should not initiate aggression/rights violations upon others. Rights in and of themselves cannot be scarce resources, as you cannot have the right to something that cannot be guaranteed, nor the right to something someone else procured, as that would necessitate the violation of their rights, mainly property. Note that this is not the same as saying you cannot have rights to specific resources or objects, as one has the right to ownership of something if they acquire it. But no one has the right to take another person's property unless the property is being used to violate rights. This means water/food is not a right, as it is both a resource someone must acquire and limited, meaning it is impossible to ensure for all. Now, what is free speech and why is it a right? Free speech is one of the foundational values that enables a free and just society. Free speech is the idea that it is a fundamental human right for one to be able to express one's opinion. This means the government may not infringe on one's ability to express one's belief. What is meant by speech? Speech refers to the expression/articulation of someone's beliefs and opinions. Under free speech, you are free to both have and express an opinion on any given topic. What makes it a right? Simply put, freedom of speech is a non-resource that stems from someone's right to self, aka their autonomy. You have the right to express your opinion as it does not require any resources, nor does it prevent the ability for others to present their speech. However, this is not the same as the right to be heard. You have the right to express an opinion on any topic, insofar as it does not violate rights, such as threats of violence, but you do not have the right to force someone to listen, as that violates a person's autonomy. So no, interrupting someone is not a violation of rights, as you still have the ability to speak even if it cannot be heard, nor not having a medium for people to hear your opinions, but it would be a violation of rights if you were arrested or killed for expressing an opinion. Furthermore, speech and ideologies are not inherently harmful. Actions that stem from beliefs can be, but the speech itself is not a violation of rights. So we know freedom of speech is a right, but what makes it important? Freedom of speech is important on two grounds. One, incorrect ideas should be disproven in the marketplace of ideas. The marketplace of ideas refers to the place where ideas are debated, disproven, and proven by people. If an idea is good, people are free to spread and hopefully adopt it. If an idea is bad, then people are free to disprove it. The point of the marketplace of ideas is to allow ideas to be determined as good or bad in the most efficient way possible, that being through public debate, similar to how a market functions. In the marketplace of ideas, any given idea can be addressed from every possible angle, and people are free to learn more and discover what is really good and bad. You are free to be offended, but that does not enable you to remove someone else's right to speak, just like how someone is free to be offended at you, and that does not remove your right to speak. Note that this does not mean that the best ideas will always be the most convincing or will be the most adopted, but it does mean people have the tools to present the logical case for varying ideas, and if rationalized well enough, they can convince almost anyone. 2. Given the government power to restrict speech not just risks, but guarantees violation of rights. The law exists to protect people's rights. The law does not exist to create a safe space for you. Someone is just as free to offend you as you are to get offended. If a government body has the power to restrict free speech, then they have to already make the judgment call on what is good or bad. The general issue with allowing the legal restriction of speech is that when you accept some ideas can be restricted, then any idea can become restricted. Not only that, the government body is incentivized to censor speech that goes against its own interest, as if it can successfully do so, then it is able to accomplish effectively whatever it pleases. That's why every tyrannical government has engaged in some form of suppression of speech, because giving the government the power to arrest people for opinions effectively gives them the power to arrest anyone for any reason, with no accountability, allowing them to further their own interests as much as they please. It is also important to note that restriction speech tends to validate it. When you remove the right to express a certain view, it gives the proponents of the view justification by victimizing them, presenting them as martyrs. And furthermore, it also tends to make other people who did not previously believe it more sympathetic to their view, and ironically more likely to support it, accomplishing the exact opposite of what restrictions on freedom of speech aim to achieve. What does this mean? Chiefly, it means quote-unquote hate speech falls under the umbrella of free speech. The government cannot arbitrarily define what opinions are correct and what are incorrect, and then punish people accordingly. That is not the role of the government. What is valid under free speech? It is still valid for individuals to boycott a product, entity, or person due to disagreements with their beliefs. This is because this falls under freedom of association and autonomy. No one is forced to buy from or engage with a specific person or product. Someone may choose to disengage for whatever reason they want. You do not have the right to be well liked or successful financially. It is also valid for one to advocate for the removal of rights, even free speech itself, no matter how immoral the position is. It only becomes illegal when what you say goes from rhetoric to tangible attempts to violate rights. For instance, under free speech, you are allowed to say something moral as, "it is good to rob banks," as the act of saying that does not necessitate the violation of rights. However, when you indicate that you or others plan to commit something that violates rights, such as "we are going to rob this bank at this time and place," then that indicates an attempt to violate rights and is thus illegal. Note that the rhetoric must beyond a reasonable doubt indicate you plan to do it. For instance, saying "I will rob a bank" as a joke does not indicate an attempt to violate rights, no matter how specific the joke gets. However, indicating that you will in fact make a serious attempt to rob a bank is an attempt to violate rights, and then the government or people have a right to take preventative action to prevent the violation of rights from occurring. Now, what does not fall under violations of free speech? Though the general principles of free speech can be relatively easily understood, there are some edge cases that are not considered to fall under free speech that lead to some confusion. I will discuss a few of the main cases, but note that I will not be covering all of them. Generally, it could be said that the government should avoid laws pertaining to speech on the basis of the truthfulness of the speech. This is generally the case, as free speech and free speech certainly falls under this principle to some extent. However, there are some rare instances where the government should assess the truthfulness of a speech legally. For instance, there is a famous example of knowingly falsely or without sufficient reason yelling, "There's a fire" in a crowded movie theater, or "I have a bomb" in an airport. These instances paint an example of someone yelling a false claim either without good reason to believe it or not believing it at all, resulting in people potentially getting harmed or property getting destroyed as people flee. Note that there is a distinction between recklessly or lying saying there's a form of threat and actually believing it. Obviously, screaming "there's a fire" in a movie theater, if there actually is a fire that threatens people, or if you have a good reason to believe there is one, is not illegal. as you are attempting to warn people of a perceived threat that you have good reason to believe exists. However, knowingly, falsely, or otherwise saying that there's a big threat without sufficient reason is endangering people and thus subject to the law. Now, said instances should reasonably get one in serious legal trouble, especially if there is property damage or people injured due to the commotion. But this may lead one to ask, what's the distinction between doing that and freely expressing an idea you know to be false that could cause harm? At first, it may seem that there is not a difference, and thus this invalidates protections for free speech, but this is false. Let me expand on two grounds, consequentialist and principled. Consequentialist. Consequentialist grounds refer to moral justifications based on the consequence of an action. For instance, saying something like murder should be illegal, as if murder is legalized, more innocent people will die, which is bad. Consequentialist grounds don't necessarily explain the foundational reason for why something is as such. Rather, it just shows the consequences or incentives of certain actions and assesses them morally, hence the name consequentialist. Now, someone falsely or recklessly saying that there's a fire or that I have a bomb in a crowded location disrupts the business, could damage property, and risk injury and death, whereas there is no benefit to it being legal, as nothing is gained from allowing someone to engage in such behavior. It only causes harm. The only benefits from the false alarm, such as it reveals that there's a flaw in the fire exit doors, are not directly or foreseeably related, may be accounted for in numerous better ways, and do not hold the same risks. As such, they are negligible. Contrastingly, restricting speech still has the issues outlined previously of allowing governments to crush dissent/opposing opinions. The prerequisite of ideas known to be false by the person saying it is irrelevant, as the government could hypothetically claim that about any given opinion, since there's no way of truly knowing if it's believed when people are able to lie and conceal their actual opinions. Furthermore, it threatens expressions of imminent danger that do legitimately have merit or claim to them, such as a natural disaster or war. This is why there must be strict circumstances and grounds for restrictions on rights, because any power you give to the government can be misused to oppress people. As you can see, it's pretty simple to argue for why one should be allowed to express an opinion claiming imminent danger, but not falsely claim an urgent threat in an area where reaction to said risk could result in injury, destruction of property, etc. Now, what are the principled grounds? Principles can be defined differently based on different philosophical lenses, so I'll clarify what I refer to when I say principles. Principles, in this context, refer to the underlying reason why something is. Here, I will explain the underlying difference between expressing a dangerous idea known to be false and the scenarios presented. The key difference between the scenarios presented and typical speech is this: the availability for discourse in the marketplace of ideas and the medium it occurs in. In a typical scenario, any opinion, no matter how perverse or immoral, can be counted in the marketplace of ideas. Any actions based on the speech do not come solely from the speech. They will only occur if the listener has a predisposition to said beliefs and is willing to enact them. For instance, let's say that there's an expression of speech that leads to the violation of rights, such as someone online sowing hatred purposely against an innocent group and claiming it is a moral necessity to kill them, despite knowing it's false. And then, as a result of that, members of said group get killed. However, the person expressing the idea did not plan to, nor did he engage in it himself. Now, the people who did the act should face legal repercussions. But what of the person who expressed the opinion? Despite the opinion being immoral, and the person who expressed it deserving social consequences for his speech, what he said still ultimately falls under the purview of freedom of expression. The people who listened chose to act in accordance with the person's doctrine. They only acted because they had a predisposition to act. Speech may exacerbate said disposition to act, but the fault is still on the individual who chose to act based on this idea without logically evaluating it. Whatever the cause of the predisposition towards a specific idea is susceptible to scrutiny in the marketplace of ideas. Whilst the intent behind speech can matter depending on the context, as I will address later, Expressing a known false view remains protected in the same manner as the same view expressed one believes to be true, as both ideas enter the marketplace of ideas to be subject to scrutiny, which is why any idea can be presented. Banning such views does not address the fundamental issue of why people are sympathetic to such a belief, and thus is inherently an improper solution. Now, one may say, but both cases, falsely claiming there's a fire and falsely inciting violence, present an imminent threat of danger and have rights violated as a result of the speech. If so, why is it moral to illegalize one and not the other? After all, someone may see anything as imminent. If they believe the threat posed by Group X is also imminent, then can't the same argument be made for that scenario? Though this is a good question, it fails to consider another important aspect: the impact of the medium on the speech. Now, we as a society accept the context of an action or word has relevance on its legality. For instance, saying take him out to say take the dog out of the house is perfectly fine. The same take him out to a person holding a hostage is the same as saying kill him, which is evidently illegal, as it is a direct and intentional initiation of a violation of rights. As one can plainly see, the context of speech does matter in terms of legality and morality. So how does that apply here? When someone expresses an opinion on a video website, news channel, book, article, etc., people are fully free to disengage. They can inherently enable you to consider your options at your leisure. Even if you perceive the directive as imminent, the context of the speech itself is not of imminent danger, as it is a non-diffuse/indirect medium, and you willingly chose to engage with the speech and the ideas it presents. Now, in the case of falsely yelling fire in a movie theater, or falsely claiming that there is a bomb in an airport, the scenarios are not conducive to the marketplace of ideas. There is an imperative to immediately act or risk one's safety. There is no venue for debate or disagreement, as the imperative to act does not stem from ideological beliefs, but it is rather a rational recognition of the threat of direct harm. Thus, it does not uphold one of the foundational principles of freedom of speech, that being the marketplace of ideas. Hence why one can still face legal consequences for such behavior. Furthermore, those in the movie theater or airport did not come there to engage with the fire threat. Rather, they have been placed in this situation, and they cannot freely disengage without risk of injury, loss of property, etc. Those who watch a video or read an article are expressly intended to engage with a view. The extent to which you adopt those views are on the individual. In summation, such cases that do not fall under free speech protections are largely defined by imperatives for safety or actions falsely issued that are not conducive for discussion in the marketplace of ideas and occur in a non-diffuse medium, necessitating immediate action. Before I cover threats/fraud, note that there is more specificity one can go into for this debate, and there is potential for gray area on how specific claims have to be to classify as an imperative to violate rights, or what context/mediums qualify as non-diffuse or imperatives to act. However, the aim of this video is to broadly justify protections for freedom of speech, and as such, I will not have time to cover those. But again, I recommend further reading if you are interested. Now, what are other speech crimes like threat or fraud? Threat refers to the overt, immediate, and direct coercion to perform an action at risk of right violations, typically in the form of physical harm. Fraud refers to engaging in a trade or contract under false pretenses, i.e., lying about your identity to manipulate the other party, or lying about what you plan to give in a deal. Why are they illegal? The consequentialist justification. There is little to no benefit allowing people to threaten others, as it would effectively legalize violation of rights, as one could threaten another with violence, and so long as they do not commit the violence, they would not get in legal trouble. Similarly, fraud would make all manner of business impossible, as any one of the parties in trade could be falsifying information. So unless you know for absolute certainty that the other party will fulfill their end of the bargain, deals will become obsolete. As such, it is pretty clear to see why threat or fraud is illegal. But what are the principled arguments? Principled justification. Direct threats of violence, or other forms of right violation do not fall under free speech as they are coercive. As if you do not act in a certain manner, you will have your rights violated. What this means is that in these circumstances, speech is effectively equivalent to force. Does this mean all forms of coercion should be illegal? No, as not all forms of coercion violate rights. For instance, let's say someone threatens someone with releasing an embarrassing video of them if they don't pay them, let's say, $10. Now, is that immoral? Sure, arguably. But should it be illegal? Well, no, as the act of releasing the video, nor the reputational damage, is not a violation of rights. You do not have the right to have no embarrassing videos of yourself, nor do you have the right to be liked. Another example, employment. Employment is technically coercive, as one generally, with some exception, needs money to access basic necessities such as food and water. Does that mean employment should be illegal? Well, no, as you do not have the right to specific quantities of money nor food/water, as outlined previously. Furthermore, all forms of trade are coercive. Someone engages in trade because they want something else more than what they're offering. Does that mean all trade should be illegal? No, that's ridiculous. People have the right to engage in trade. In fact, reality itself is coercive. We need shelter, food, and water as basic necessities to live. But we also need human connection and experiences to satisfy our brains and feel happy or fulfilled. Not having these met are not a violation of rights, as you have no right to something that cannot be ensured. So, threats are illegal because they are coercion to violate rights. What of fraud? Well, fraud also functions as a de facto violation of rights. For instance, if someone pretends to be someone else and then withdraws money from their bank account, then that is a violation of their right to property. Similarly, if someone is engaging in trade under false pretenses, then that may also be a violation of property rights. For instance, if someone agrees to pay $10,000 for a truck, but then takes the truck and doesn't pay, that's a violation of the truck owner's property rights, as they only agreed to transfer ownership under the condition that they were paid. Now, I could go on and cover 1,000,001 specific examples of free speech, but I believe that covers most cases. And if interested, please look into any specific examples you find intriguing, such as in the cases of defamation, which I briefly alluded to, or lying under oath. I would also recommend reading books such as The Ethics of Liberty by Rothbard, which I have found personally helpful in my research due to the depths of detail it goes to on matters of property rights, freedom of association, intellectual property, etc. In conclusion, freedom of speech is a right. Someone expressing an opinion does not justify violating their rights. We as a society need to resist the impulse to call for the legal prosecution of others simply on the basis that we don't like their views. Thank you for listening.